You're listening to Rewriting the Rules, the podcast that dares to go deeper than training. I'm Bethany Bell, creator of the Canine Dialogue Dynamics Method, and this is where behaviour meets relationship, science meets the soul, and obedience takes a backseat to understanding. Let's change the conversation. Welcome back to Rewriting the Rules. Today we're going to discuss enrichment versus pressure, rethinking what dogs really need. Enrichment has become one of those big buzzwords in the dog world. We see it everywhere: puzzle feeders, lick mats, Kongs, scatter feeding, frozen meals stuffed into toys. We're told this is what modern dogs need, that it prevents boredom, relieves stress, and gives them vital mental stimulation. And for many people, it's become a daily ritual. Every meal has to be served with a challenge attached. But here's the question I want to explore today. When does enrichment stop being enriching and start becoming pressure? Because food is not a luxury, it's not entertainment, it's a basic survival need. And when we start turning food into puzzles, games, and obstacles, we need to ask ourselves, are we really enriching our dogs' lives? Or are we just creating another way of controlling them? And I'm not saying that all enrichment is bad. I'm not suggesting that no dog enjoys enrichment or even food enrichment. It's just a question to explore. So in this episode, I want to look at the differences between enrichment that genuinely supports dog well-being and enrichment that risks doing the opposite. We'll talk about what food enrichment really is, how it's promoted compared to what it actually does, the negative effects of making dogs work for their meals, and why some common practices like scatter feeding or Kongs can create more stress than calm. And then we'll explore what real enrichment and mental stimulation actually looks like when we step away from pressure and towards natural living. And just as always, this is not about blame or guilt. If you've used food enrichment tools before, that does not make you a bad guardian. We've all been there because this is what we've been taught to believe is right. I am included in this. I used to promote ditching the food bowl. I used to think that food enrichment was one of the best, most ethical ways to feed a dog, until I started to explore. My aim here is simply to open up the conversation and invite you to see things through a different lens, one that honours your dog's needs without making them perform for the basics in life. So let's start by looking at what food enrichment actually is and how it's usually presented to us. When people talk about enrichment, most of the time they're talking about food-based activities, like puzzle feeders that make your dog push levers or slide blocks to get their meals, rubber Kongs stuffed with food and frozen solid so it takes half an hour to reach the last mouthful, scatter feeding where kibble is thrown all across the floor or the garden for the dog to forage and pick up piece by piece, or licky mats where soft food is smeared into grooves so the dog has to work slowly. These tools and techniques are promoted as being essential for our dog's well-being. The claims usually go something like this. They prevent boredom, they reduce stress and calm anxious dogs, they provide mental stimulation, they slow down eating, which is said to be healthier, and they give dogs an outlet for their natural foraging instincts. And it sounds good on paper, doesn't it? And because these ideas are repeated so often by trainers, which was including myself when I was a trainer, by vets, by companies selling the products, and now many guardians feel it's almost irresponsible to serve food in a bowl. A plain bowl of food is framed as wasted opportunity, while a Kong or a puzzle is framed as good parenting. But just because something is widely promoted does not mean it's automatically true, as we've been exploring in this series. And just because it's marketed as enrichment doesn't actually mean it enriches our dogs' lives. In fact, for many dogs, the opposite is often the case. But what's the problem? If enrichment is meant to be fun and healthy, why question it? But the truth is, for many dogs, food-based enrichment doesn't enrich at all. In fact, it usually does do the opposite. First, food is not optional. It's a basic survival need. When we turn every meal into a challenge, we risk pushing dogs into a survival mindset. Imagine if every time you were hungry, your meal was hidden inside a puzzle box or scattered across the floor. You wouldn't feel enriched. You'd just feel controlled and probably a bit annoyed. And that's the second point. When we make dogs work for food, we position ourselves as the gatekeepers. Food stops being a right and starts being something to earn. And that changes the relationship dynamic in ways that we don't often notice. And thirdly, many of these tools actually create frustration. A Kong that's packed too tightly or a puzzle that's just too difficult can leave a dog feeling stressed, not satisfied. For some dogs, this turns into obsessive behaviour where they spend more time wrestling with objects than enjoying the food. And for others, it just makes them opt out, give up. They give up not because they're calm, but because they no longer believe that they can succeed. And let's not ignore the impact of scarcity. Feeding practices like scatter feeding can, in some dogs, trigger food guarding or competition. In multi-dog households, this is especially common. Instead of creating calm meal times, we create meal times full of tension. Now, does this happen with every dog every time? Of course not. Some dogs do enjoy these activities, and some families find them useful. But the problem is the blanket message that all dogs need enrichment in this form, and that food should always be turned into a task. And that's simply not true. And for many dogs, it causes more stress than it actually relieves. But let's explore scatter feeding. This is something I used to do a lot with my dogs, and I used to promote it. But one of the most common recommendations you'll hear is scatter feeding. The idea is simple. Instead of giving your dogs their food in a bowl, you'll throw it across the floor or in the garden so they have to search for it. The argument is that it mimics natural foraging, gets the dog's nose working. But here's the question. Do dogs actually forage in this way? Are they natural grazers like chickens pecking or pigs rooting around? The answer is no. Dogs are not chickens, and they're not pigs. Dogs are opportunistic feeders. They're scavengers by design. That means that they eat when food is available, and they eat it as directly and efficiently as possible. In natural or semi-wild settings, dogs eat in a few key ways: scavenging from human settlements, chewing and gnawing on carcasses or bones, eating from shared resources such as rubbish heap or a kill, and accepting food directly from humans. None of these resemble scattering kibble across the floor. That style of eating, bit by bit, pecking and scratching, belongs to grazing species like birds, pigs, or rodents. It's not canine behaviour. And while some dogs may tolerate scatter feeding or even enjoy it occasionally, for others it can create stress. Searching for every last crumb can mimic scarcity, and for some it encourages frantic behaviour. In multi-dog homes, it often sparks competition and guarding. So while scatter feeding is often promoted as enrichment, we have to be careful. Just because it gives the dogs something to do doesn't mean it truly enriches their life, especially if it's replacing calm, safe, predictable meal times with an artificial challenge. And I hear this argument a lot, but dogs would work for food in the wild. And I'm guilty of saying this, but a really common defense of food enrichment is this phrase: well, in the wild, dogs would have to work for their food. And on the surface, that does sound reasonable. I used to think it was perfectly reasonable. But let's just pause and think about this. First of all, what do we actually mean by the wild? Modern dogs are not wild animals. They've lived alongside humans for thousands of years. They've adapted to share food with us, to scavenge from our homes, and to be fed directly. Their relationship with food has always been bound up with their relationship with people. And secondly, yes, a wild animal might have to hunt or scavenge for their meals, but that isn't enrichment. That's survival. It's stressful, it's unpredictable, and it often involves hunger, danger, and competition. And we wouldn't describe a wolf struggling to find food in the winter as enriched. We'd describe them as surviving. And here's the bigger question. Even if we accept that wild canids have to work for their meals, does that mean our dogs should? That's like saying humans would have once hunted and foraged for every bite of food, therefore we should be doing the same today. Some people do enjoy hunting or foraging, and that's fine, but most of us are grateful for the security of a meal on the table. We don't feel deprived because we didn't chase it down ourselves. Our dogs deserve that same security. Food is not a privilege to be earned. It's a right. It should be given freely, predictably, and without unnecessary obstacles. If we want to provide enrichment, we can do it in ways that allow freedom, choice, and joy, not by turning a survival need into a daily task. So if food puzzles and forced challenges are not the answer, what does real enrichment look like? Well, true enrichment isn't about turning necessities into games. It's about giving dogs safe, natural outlets to express who they are. It's about freedom and choice and variety in their daily lives without adding unnecessary stress. Real enrichment can be as simple as exploring on walks, letting your dogs choose the route sometimes, pausing when they want to sniff, getting involved with them when they're doing it, and treating the walk as an experience and not a chore. Dialogue and language, speaking with your dog, teaching them words and phrases so that they can participate in daily life. This engages the brain in a way that no puzzle toy can. And play, not structured training games, but genuine, joyful play that matches your dog's personality, tug, chase, and simply rolling in grass. Sensory experiences, safe access to water, new textures underfoot, and different environments that spark curiosity. And rest and security. Sometimes enrichment isn't about doing more, but about having the freedom to switch off without pressure. Food can still be part of enrichment, but it should be about sharing and security, not control. Eating calmly from a bowl, sharing food experiences with the family, or enjoying a natural chew that satisfies the need to gnaw. These things are enriching because they meet both physical and emotional needs. The real question is not, how can I make my dogs work for food? It's how can I make their life richer, more secure, and more in tune with who they are? And when we start from that perspective, enrichment becomes something far more meaningful than a frozen Kong. And there's another part of the conversation that's often overlooked. True enrichment doesn't come from the way we deliver food. It comes from the food itself. Dogs don't benefit from the stress of puzzle toys. They benefit from the variety in their diet, from different tastes, textures, and smells, from meals that are satisfying to chew, lick, and savor. Think about the differences between a bowl of the same dry kibble every day versus a diet that includes fresh foods, vegetables, meats, broths, and natural chews. One is repetitive, the other is nourishing, stimulating, and alive with sensory experiences. Enrichment can be as simple as adding real variety to what your dog eats, crunchy foods alongside softer textures, different smells and flavors that engage their senses, natural colors and whole ingredients that feel vibrant and real. An occasional novelty like a safe new fruit or a homemade broth poured over their meal. This is where enrichment truly belongs. Not in making food harder to access, but making it more satisfying and life-giving when it's offered. Because at the end of the day, food should feel like abundance, not scarcity. It should enrich your dog's body and mind by what it is, and not by how much effort they have to put in just to reach it. But one of the things we don't often stop to consider is the psychological cost of making dogs work for their food. From the outside, it does look like fun. A dog is pawing at a puzzle, nudging a Kong, or licking a mat. They look engaged, but what's really happening inside? For many dogs, it's not joy, it's stress. Their heart rate rises, their breathing quickens, and their body language shifts into problem solving under pressure. It's not calm, it's survival mode. Think about it this way. Imagine if every time you sat down for dinner, you had to solve a Sudoku first, or your plate was locked into a box that you had to fiddle with for 20 minutes. Maybe once in a while it might feel like a novelty, but if it happens every single day, multiple times a day, it would stop being fun very quickly, and you wouldn't feel enriched. You feel exhausted and possibly even resentful. The same is true for our dogs. Food is not entertainment, it's a basic need. And when that comes with obstacles or conditions, it can quietly teach the dog that nothing in life is safe or predictable unless they perform. Over time, this can actually increase anxiety rather than relieve it. Calmness after a Kong isn't always true contentment. Often it's simply exhaustion. The dog isn't always relaxed, they're depleted. And that's a really important distinction to make. And another part of this conversation that we really need to look at is how the dog industry has taken the word enrichment and turned it into a marketing tool. Companies now make millions selling products that promise to keep your dog entertained, fulfilled, and mentally stimulated. From puzzle toys and lick mats to subscription boxes and enrichment gadgets, guardians are told that these things are not optional, they're essential. And the underlying message is often, if you're not doing this, you're failing your dog. That pressure creates guilt. People feel that they must constantly come up with new activities or spend money on the latest enrichment toy just to be a good dog parent. But here's the truth. The most enriching thing in your dog's life does not come from a shop. They come from time with you, freedom to explore, the chance to use their senses, and the security of knowing food, comfort, and love are always available. Enrichment doesn't have to mean gadgets or gimmicks. It doesn't have to mean working harder to keep your dog occupied every moment of the day. In fact, sometimes real enrichment means slowing down, simplifying, and giving your dog the space to just be a dog. Another point worth exploring is often how enrichment gets confused with management. A really common example is using a Kong or a lick mat to keep a dog busy while we're on a work call or while we pop out the house. And there's nothing inherently wrong with that. Sometimes life is busy and practical tools help. But we need to be honest about what's happening. That is not enrichment. That's management. It's a way of occupying the dog so they don't protest or get into mischief. It's like giving a child an iPad so that you can get dinner cooked. It may be practical and it may be useful, but it's not the same as true enrichment. The problem comes when management tools are rebranded as enrichment and guardians are led to believe that because their dog spent half an hour working on a Kong, they've had a fulfilling experience. In reality, the dog hasn't had freedom, choice, or expression. They've simply been kept busy. And if we rely too heavily on these tools, we risk creating a pattern where the dog learns that stillness and calm only come through exhaustion or distraction, not through genuine security. And that's why it's so important to separate the two. Management has its place, but it's not the same thing as enrichment. So before we wrap up, I'd like to leave you with a few questions to think about. You don't need to answer them right now, but maybe just hold them in your mind the next time you feed your dog, or when you reach out for the enrichment tool. When I give my dog enrichment, am I relieving pressure or adding it? Does my dog finish the activity looking truly calm and fulfilled, or do they seem frustrated, frantic, or simply exhausted? If enrichment wasn't marketed to me as something I should do, would I naturally believe my dog needed it? And am I using food as a way to connect with my dog, or as a way to control access to what they need? And perhaps most importantly, is my dog's life already rich in ways that don't involve food puzzles through freedom, exploration, dialogue, variety, and security? These aren't questions with right or wrong answers. They're simply an invitation to notice what enrichment really looks like in your home and whether it matches what your dog actually needs. So as we close today, I want to leave you with this reminder. Real enrichment isn't about forcing dogs to work for their food or filling every moment of their lives with activities. It's about creating a life that feels safe, natural, and fulfilling. Food is a right, not a privilege, and it should bring security, not stress. Enrichment is found in freedom, exploration, dialogue, play, rest, and in the quality of what we feed our dogs, not in making them jump through hoops for what they need to survive. The real question to take away is this. When I think I'm enriching my dog's life, am I really adding richness or am I adding pressure? Next week, we're going to build on this by exploring another huge buzzword in the dog world, impulse control. What does it really mean? Why has it become such a focus? And what's the cost when we prioritize control over trust, consent, and emotional integrity? I think you'll find it both challenging and refreshing. Until then, thank you for listening, and thank you, as always, for rewriting the rules with me. See you next Thursday.